Hi there, I'm Randy Patterson, and this is Psychology Salon, a channel about psychological issues. If you like this kind of thing, click subscribe. I'd like to talk today about a pattern that I see in many young people involving the expectations of adult life, specifically about whether or not to have children. One way that some people look at therapy is that the point of it is to help you adjust. In other words, if you're a square peg, our job is to file off those edges to fit you into the round hole of the future that society has laid out for you. Another way of viewing it is that therapy is about retaining those edges that suit you and finding a setting in which they fit. I've never been too interested in helping people eliminate their uniqueness or personality in order to fit in. Fitting in can be overrated. My preference is to work with a person to retain their interests and pursue them in a way that works. For many of us, filing off those inconvenient aspects of our identity just isn't an option, even if for some reason you think you'd like to. A lot of people try to do it for a while, then they realize that the real mission is something else entirely. It's in large part to use your individuality to build a life that's satisfying for you. But that's not a lesson that people take on automatically if they're part of the majority of people. For many people, the expectations and pressure to conform to a specific sequence in life is really strong. Early in my career, it was sometimes a surprise to me how powerfully people felt those life expectations. By 20, you do this. By 25, you do that. By 30, you have a career and a marriage. By 35, you have 2 kids, and so on. And a lot of the people I was seeing didn't feel that that future really suited them. But they didn't feel there was an option to construct a life for themselves that suited them better. Many of them viewed their own futures with a kind of resignation. My childhood was fun, but now there's a jail cell marked adulthood waiting for me, and I have to go lock myself in for the rest of my life. In a surprising number of cases, that involved having children. It's what you're supposed to do. It's not optional. So it doesn't matter whether you're interested or whether you really want to dedicate a big part of your life to child raising, or whether you believe that you're really suited to parenthood. It's just part of the path. After you get through grade 9, you do grade 10. After getting into a relationship, you have children. This is not an inspiring way to live your life. My hope is that whoever you are, if you choose to have a long-term relationship, it's because you want it. If that involves marriage, it's because you chose it. If you have kids, it's because you want to have kids and you've thought about it and really want to dedicate a large chunk of your life to that wonderful, honorable endeavor. What we don't really want is someone having children because they feel like they have to, that it's contrary to their wish for their life, but it's what everyone else does, so hey, I guess I have to too. Why don't we want that? Well, because it's going to come out in your parenting, in neglect or resentment. Our society needs children. But it does not need the children of resentful parents who never wanted that job. And let's face it, it's not as though we don't have enough human beings on the planet. There are over 8 billion of us now, more than 3 times as many as in 1950, which itself was more than there had ever been. The world is groaning under the burden of so many people consuming so many resources. We have shortages of an enormous number of things. Human beings are not among those shortages. In making this post, I'm conscious that it could get lumped in with what has come to be called antinatalism. the belief that you simply should not have children and that it's morally wrong to do so. That is not where I'm coming from. In most developed economies, the fertility rate is below the replacement figure of approximately 2.1 children per woman. We may not need huge numbers of children to save the species. The species is far more at risk from environmental breakdown due to our relentless consumption of resources and our production of greenhouse gases. But we do need some children, and the decision made by many to have fewer kids or no kids means that if you see this as a primary element of your life, fine. If this is something you really want to dedicate yourself to, great. If you want and can effectively nurture 2 or 3 or 4, terrific. But again, we do not need everyone to be child raising, and we don't need unwanted children. In most developed economies, the decision about whether or not to have children, whether to use birth control, and whether to carry an unexpected pregnancy to term is regarded as a decision best made by a free citizen exercising their own choice based on their own awareness of their circumstances and capabilities. Recently, in parts of the United States, a citizen's decision about what to do with her own body has been made the business of her government instead. She doesn't get to decide. Her legislature, composed largely of people who have never met her, they get to decide. This is an enormous expression of faith in the judgment of intrusive government power. Faith, well, you can probably tell I don't personally share. But I suppose the giving over of personal decision-making power and freedom and self-determination to the government, that's ultimately up to the voters. I always assumed that people would generally vote to have more freedom, not less. But maybe I was wrong. Anyway, having children is a big decision. And to the extent possible, I hope that it is a decision, not a capitulation to the demands of society or peers or your government. But what about regret? People are constantly told that if they don't have children, and not at the right time, they'll regret that decision later. And this is possible. It does happen. People who feel that when they faced that fork in the road, kids or no kids, they made the wrong choice. But in recent surveys on regrets about such decisions later in life, it appears that those who did have children regret their decision about as often. And there are many who say that if they were given life to live over again, they probably would decide not to have children. Having regret in either direction isn't great, though people are generally quite good at letting the past be the past. If you're afraid of regret, it's best to make your decision carefully and consciously to the extent that you can. But there's no evidence that people are more likely to have regrets if they're childless. In fact, they may not see themselves as being childless. They may call themselves child-free. My point here is that adulthood is, for the most part, about taking your life into your own hands, getting into the driver's seat of your life. And if that choice is to have children, wonderful. And realize what that child or those children are. A man I once talked to raised the issue of his legacy in the world. I asked him how many of the contracts and work projects he was involved with would still be active in the year 2100. He looked surprised. Well, none, obviously. I reminded him that he had a child, and the odds are that child will still be alive in 2100. If you want to know what your legacy is, I told him, that's it. Dedicate your attention accordingly. If you're going to have children, take that task seriously. I'm a psychologist. We don't need more business. So if child raising has no appeal for you, the last thing we need is another parent who's not interested, who isn't willing to put in the work, and who is only doing it to satisfy someone else or societal expectations. There isn't one path in life, one sequence written by someone else that you have to follow into the grave. It's a blank page for you to write. And if there aren't any children in that story, fine. Adulthood is a branching out of possibility, not a narrowing down. So, please, thinking of having children? Good. Think. Make that decision consciously. It isn't a bad thing. Parenting can be wonderful. And parenting is not a required part of adulthood. There are other videos on this channel on the psychology of everyday life. Click the subscribe button for more. I also have an online course site, psychologysalon.teachable.com, with programs for professionals and for the general public. And my guide, The Assertiveness Workbook, is available from bookstores and online booksellers. Thanks for watching.